History of Hinduism denotes a wide variety of related Hindu denominations native to the Indian subcontinent, most of whom live in modern-day Nepal and India. Its history overlaps or coincides with the development of Indian religions since Iron Age India. It has thus been called the oldest living religion in the world. Scholars regard Hinduism as a synthesis of various Indian cultures and traditions, with diverse roots and no single founder or source. The history of Hinduism is often divided into periods of development, with the first period being that of the historical Vedic religion dated from about 1750 BCE. The subsequent period, between 800 BCE and 200 BCE, was a turning point between the Vedic religion and Hindu religions, and a formative period for Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism. The epic and early Puranic period, from c. 200 BCE to 500 CE, saw the classical Golden Age of Hinduism, which coincides with the Gupta Empire. In this period the 6 branches of Hindu philosophy evolved, namely Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Monotheistic sects like Shaivism and Vaishnavism developed during this same period through the Bhakti Movement. The period from roughly 650 to 1100 CE forms the late Classical period or early Middle Ages, in which classical Puranic Hinduism is established, and Adi Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, which incorporated Buddhist thought into Vedanta, marking a shift from realistic to idealistic thought. Hinduism under the Islamic rulers from 1100 to c. 1750 saw the increasing prominence of the Bhakti movement, which remains influential today. The colonial period saw the emergence of various Hindu reform movements, partly inspired by Western movements such as Unitarianism and Theosophy. The partition of India in 1947 was along religious lines, with the Republic of India emerging with a Hindu majority. During the 20th century, due to the Indian diaspora, Hindu minorities have formed in all continents, with the largest communities in absolute numbers in the United States and the United Kingdom. In the Republic of India, Hindu nationalism has emerged as a strong political force since the 1980s. The Hindutva Bharatiya Janata Party forming the Government of India from 1999 to 2004, and its first state government in South India in 2006, and also the Narendra Modi-led government from 2014. Roots of Hinduism. Western scholars regard Hinduism as a fusion, a synthesis of various Indian cultures and traditions. Among its roots of the historical Vedic religion of Iron Age India itself, already the product of a composite of the Indo-Aryan and Harappan cultures and civilizations, but also the Sramana Renansa traditions of northeast India, a Mesolithic and Neolithic cultures of India, such as the religions of the Indus Valley Civilization, Dravidian traditions, and the local traditions and tribal religions. After the Vedic period, between 500–200 BCE and c. 300 CE, at the beginning of the epic and Puranic c.Q. pre-classical period, the Hindu synthesis emerged, which incorporated Sramanic and Buddhist influences and the emerging Bhakti tradition into the Brahmanical fold via the Smriti literature. This synthesis emerged under the pressure of the success of Buddhism and Jainism. During the Gupta reign, the first Puranas were written, which were used to disseminate mainstream religious ideology amongst pre-literate and tribal groups undergoing acculturation. The resulting Puranic Hinduism differed markedly from the earlier Brahmanism of the Dharmasastras and the Smritis. Hinduism coexisted for several centuries with Buddhism, to finally gain the upper hand at all levels in the 8th century. From northern India, this Hindu synthesis and its genocidal divisions spread to southern India and parts of Southeast Asia. It was aided by the settlement of Brahmins on land granted by local rulers, the incorporation and assimilation of popular non-Vedic gods, and the process of Sanskritization, in which people from many strata of society throughout the subcontinent tended to adapt their religious and social life to Brahmanic norms. This process of assimilation explains the wide diversity of local cultures in India, half shrouded in a tattered cloak of conceptual unity. Periodization. James Mill, in his The History of British India, distinguished three phases in the history of India, namely Hindu, Muslim and British civilizations. This periodization has been criticized for the misconceptions it has given rise to. Another periodization is the division into ancient, classical, medieval and modern periods. Although this periodization has also received criticism, Romila Thapa notes that the division of Hindu, Muslim, British periods of Indian history gives too much weight to ruling dynasties and foreign invasions, neglecting the social-economic history which often showed a strong continuity. The division in ancient, medieval, modern overlooks the fact that the Muslim conquests took place between the 8th and the 14th century, while the south was never completely conquered. According to Thapa, a periodization could also be based on significant social and economic changes, which are not strictly related to a change of ruling powers. Smart and Michaels seem to follow Mill's periodization, while Flood and Musa follow the ancient, classical, medieval and modern periods. Periodization. An elaborate periodization may be as follows: Prehistory and Indus Valley Civilization, Vedic Period, Second Urbanization, Classical Period, Pre-Classical Period, Golden Age, Late Classical Period, Medieval Period, Early Modern Period, Modern Period, Pre-Vedic religions. Prehistory. Anatomically modern humans are thought to have arrived in South India about 75,000–60,000 years back, during Paleolithic times. These people were Australoids who may have been closely related to Aboriginal Australians. They are probably almost extinct or largely covered by successive waves, after the Australoids, Caucasoids, including both Elamo-Dravidians and Indo-Aryans, and Mongoloids immigrated into India. The Elamo-Dravidians possibly from Elam, present-day Iran, and the Tibeto-Burmans possibly from the Himalayan and northeastern borders of the subcontinent. The earliest prehistoric religion in India that may have left its traces in Hinduism comes from Mesolithic, as observed in the sites such as the rock paintings of Bhimbetka rock shelters dating to a period of 30,000 BCE or older, as well as Neolithic times. Some of the religious practices can be considered to have originated in 4000 BCE. Several tribal religions still exist, though you must not assume that there are many similarities between prehistoric and contemporary tribal communities. Indus Valley Civilization. Some Indus Valley seals show swastikas, which are found in other religions worldwide. Phallic symbols interpreted as the much later Hindu linga have been found in the Harappan remains. Many Indus Valley seals show animals. One seal shows a horned figure seated in a posture reminiscent of the lotus position and surrounded by animals, was named by early excavators Pashupati, an epithet of the later Hindu gods Shiva and Rudra. Writing in 1997, Doris Meth Srinivasan said, "Not too many recent studies continue to call the seal's figure a proto-Shiva, rejecting thereby Marshall's package of proto-Shiva features, including that of 3 heads." She interprets what John Marshall interpreted as facial as not human but more bovine, possibly a divine buffalo man. According to Iravath Mahadevan, symbols 47 and 48 of his Indus script glossary. The Indus script texts, concordance and tables representing seated human-like figures could describe the South Indian deity Murugan. In view of the large number of figurines found in the Indus Valley, some scholars believe that the Harappan people worshipped a mother goddess symbolizing fertility, a common practice among rural Hindus even today. However, this view has been disputed by S. Clarke, who sees it as an inadequate explanation of the function and construction of many of the figurines. There are no religious buildings or evidence of elaborate burials. If there were temples, they have not been identified. However, House 1 in Hra area in Mohenjodara's lower town has been identified as a possible temple. Vedic period. The commonly proposed period of earlier Vedic ages dated back to 2nd millennium BCE. Vedism was the sacrificial religion of the early Indo-Aryans, speakers of early Old Indic dialects, ultimately deriving from the Proto-Indo-Iranian peoples of the Bronze Age. Origins. The Vedic period, named after the Vedic religion of the Indo-Aryans, lasted from c. 1750 to 500 BCE. The Indo-Aryans were a branch of the Indo-European language family, which many scholars believe originated in Kurgan culture of the Central Asian steppes. Indeed, the Vedic religion, including the names of certain deities, was in essence a branch of the same religious tradition as the ancient Greeks, Romans, Persians, and Germanic peoples. For example, the Vedic god Diaspita is a variant of the Proto-Indo-European god *Diasph2ter, from which also derived the Greek Zeus and the Roman Jupiter. Similarly, the Vedic Manu and Yama derived from the *Manu and *Yemo, from which also derived the Germanic Manus and Ymir. The Indo-Aryans were pastoralists who migrated into northwestern India after the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization. The Indo-Aryans were a branch of the Indo-Iranians, which originated in the Andronovo culture in the Bactria Marjana era, in present northern Afghanistan. The roots of this culture go back further to the Sintashta culture, with funeral sacrifices which show close parallels to the sacrificial funeral rites of the Rig Veda. The Indo-Aryans split off around 1800 to 1600 BCE from the Iranians, where after they were defeated and split into two groups by the Iranians, who dominated the central Eurasian steppe zone and chased them to the extremities of central Eurasia. One group were the Indo-Aryans, who founded the Mitanni kingdom in northern Syria. The other group were the Vedic people, who were pursued by the Iranians across the Near East to the Levant, across Iran into India. During the early Vedic period, Vedic tribes were pastoralists wandering around in northwest India. After 1100 BCE, with the introduction of iron, the Vedic tribes moved into the western Ganges plain, adapting an agrarian lifestyle. Rudimentary state forms appeared, of which the Kuru tribe and realm was the most influential. It was a tribal union, which developed into the first recorded state-level society in South Asia around 1000 BCE. It decisively changed the Vedic heritage of the early Vedic period, collecting the Vedic hymns into collections, and developing new rituals which gained the position in Indian civilization as the orthodox Rta rituals, which contributed to the so-called classical synthesis or Hindu synthesis. Rig Vedic religion. The Indo-Aryans brought with them the language and religion. The Vedic beliefs and practices of the pre-classical era were closely related to the hypothesized Proto-Indo-European religion, and the Indo-Iranian religion. According to Antony, the Old Indic religion probably emerged among Indo-European immigrants in the contact zone between the Zeravshan River and Iran. It was a syncretic mixture of Old Central Asian and New Indo-European elements, which borrowed distinctive religious beliefs and practices from the Bactria Marjana culture. At least 383 non-Indo-European words were borrowed from this culture, including the god Indra and the ritual drink soma. According to Antony, many of the qualities of Indo-Iranian god of might, victory, Varithrana, were transferred to the adopted god Indra, who became the central deity of the developing Old Indic culture. Indra was the subject of 250 hymns, a quarter of the Rig Veda. He was associated more than any other deity with soma, a stimulant drug probably borrowed from the Bhakti religion. His rise to prominence was a peculiar trait of the Old Indic speakers. The oldest inscriptions in Old Indic, the language of the Rig Veda, are found not in northwestern India and Pakistan, but in northern Syria, the location of the Mitanni kingdom. The Mitanni kings took Old Indic throne names, and used Old Indic technical terms were used for horse riding and chariot driving. The Old Indic term Rta, meaning cosmic order and truth, the central concept of the Rig Veda, was also employed in the Mitanni kingdom, and Old Indic gods, including Indra, were also known in the Mitanni kingdom. The religion was further developed when they migrated into the Ganges plain after c. 1100 BCE and became settled farmers, further syncretizing with the native cultures of northern India. The Vedic religion of the later Vedic period coexisted with local religions, such as the Yaksha cults, and was itself the product of a composite of the Indo-Aryan and Harappan cultures and civilizations. David Gordon White cites three other mainstream scholars who have emphatically demonstrated that Vedic religion is partially derived from the Indus Valley Civilizations. The religion was further developed when they migrated into the Ganges plain after c. 1100 BCE and became settled farmers, further syncretizing with the native cultures of northern India. Vedas.Its liturgy is preserved in the three Vedic Samhitas, the Rig Veda, Sama Veda and the Yajur Veda. The Vedic texts were the texts of the elite, and do not necessarily represent popular ideas or practices. Of these, the Rig Veda is the oldest, a collection of hymns composed between California 1500 to 1200 BCE. The other two add ceremonial detail for the performance of the actual sacrifice. The Atharva Veda may also contain compositions dating to before 1000 BCE. It contains material pertinent to domestic ritual and folk magic of the period. These texts, as well as the voluminous commentary on orthopraxy collected in the Brahmanas compiled during the early first millennium BCE, were transmitted by oral tradition alone until the advent, in the 4th century AD, of the Pallava and Gupta period, and by a combination of written and oral tradition since then. The Hindu Samskaras go back to a hoary antiquity. The Vedas, the Brahmanas, the Greh Sutras, the Dharma Sutras, the Smritis and other treatises describe the rites, ceremonies and customs. The earliest text of the Vedas is the Rig Veda, a collection of poetic hymns used in the sacrificial rites of Vedic priesthood. Many Rig Vedic hymns concern the fire ritual and especially the offering of soma to the gods. Soma is both an intoxicant and a god itself, as is the sacrificial fire, Agni. The royal horse sacrifice is a central rite in the Yajur Veda. The gods in the Rig Veda are mostly personified concepts, who fall into two categories. The Devas, who were gods of nature, such as the weather deity Indra, Agni, Usha, Surya and Apus on the one hand, and on the other hand the Asuras, gods of moral concepts, such as Mitra, Ayuman, Bhagra, Varuna, the supreme Asura, while Rig Vedic Deva is variously applied to most gods, including many of the Asuras. The Devas are characterized as younger gods while Asuras are the older gods. In later Vedic texts, the Asuras become demons. The Rig Veda has 10 mandalas. There is significant variation in the language and style between the family books, Book 8, the Soma Mandala, and the more recent books 1 and 10. The older books share many aspects of common Indo-Iranian religion, and is an important source for the reconstruction of earlier common Indo-European traditions. Especially RV8 has striking similarity to the Avesta, containing allusions to Afghan flora and fauna, e.g., to camels. Many of the central religious terms in Vedic Sanskrit have cognates in the religious vocabulary of other Indo-European languages. Especially notable is the fact that in the Avesta Asura is known as good and Deva as evil entity, quite the opposite of the Rig Veda. Cosmic order. Ethics in the Vedas are based on the concepts of Satya and Rta. Satya is the principle of integration rooted in the absolute. Ta is the expression of Satya, which regulates and coordinates the operation of the universe and everything within it. Conformity with Ta would enable progress, whereas its violation would lead to punishment. Panikar remarks, Ta is the ultimate foundation of everything, it is the supreme, although this is not to be understood in a static sense. It is the expression of the primordial dynamism that is inherent in everything. The term Dharma was already used in Brahmanical thought, where it was conceived as an aspect of Rta. The term Rta is also known from the Proto-Indo-Iranian religion, the religion of the Indo-Iranian peoples prior to the earliest Vedic and Zoroastrian scriptures. Asher is the Avestan language term corresponding to Vedic language Rta. Upanishads. The 9th and 8th centuries BCE witnessed the composition of the earliest Upanishads. Upanishads formed the theoretical basis of classical Hinduism and are known as Vedanta. The older Upanishads launched attacks of increasing intensity on the rituals. However, a philosophical and allegorical meaning is also given to these rituals. In some later Upanishads there is a spirit of accommodation towards rituals. The tendency which appears in the philosophical hymns of the Vedas to reduce the number of gods to one principle becomes prominent in the Upanishads. The diverse monistic speculations of the Upanishads were synthesized into a theistic framework by the sacred Hindu scripture Bhagavad Gita. Brahmanism in Iron Age India. During a period roughly spanning the 10th to 6th centuries BCE, the Mahajanapadas arise from the earlier petty kingdoms of the various Rig Vedic tribes, and the failing remnants of the later Rapin culture. In this period the mantra portions of the Vedas are largely completed, and a flowering industry of Vedic priesthood organized in numerous schools develops exegetical literature, viz. the Brahmanas. These schools also edited the Vedic mantra portions into fixed recensions, that were to be preserved purely by oral tradition over the following 2 millennia. Second urbanization. Upanishads and Shramana movements. Increasing urbanization of India in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE led to the rise of new ascetic Shramana movements which challenged the orthodoxy of rituals. Mahavira, proponent of Jainism, and Buddha, founder of Buddhism, were the most prominent icons of this movement. According to Heinrich Zimmer, Jainism and Buddhism are part of the pre-Vedic heritage, which also includes Samkhya and Yoga, does not derive from Brahman-Aryan sources, but reflects the cosmology and anthropology of a much older pre-Aryan upper class of northeastern India, being rooted in the same subsoil of archaic metaphysical speculation as Yoga, Sankhya, and Buddhism, the other non-Vedic Indian systems. The Shramana tradition in part created the concept of the cycle of birth and death, the concept of samsara, and the concept of liberation, which became characteristic for Hinduism. Pratt notes that Oldenburg, Newman and Radhakrishnan believed that the Buddha Buddhist canon had been influenced by Upanishads, while Lavalipusan thinks the influence was nihil, and Eliot and several others insist that on some points the Buddha was directly antithetical to the Upanishads. Survival of Vedic ritual. Vedism as the religious tradition of Hinduism of a priestly elite was marginalized by other traditions such as Jainism and Buddhism in the later Iron Age, but in the Middle Ages would rise to renewed prestige with the Mimamsa school, which as well as all other Astika traditions of Hinduism, considered the morpholess and eternal. A last surviving elements of the historical Vedic religion of Vedism is Rta tradition, following many major elements of Vedic religion, and is prominent in southern India, with communities in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, but also in some pockets of Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra and other states. The best known of these groups are the Nambudi area of Kerala, whose traditions were notably documented by Starr. Mauryan Empire. The Mauryan period saw an early flowering of classical Sanskrit Sutra and Shastra literature and the scholarly exposition of the circumvedic fields of the Vedanga. However, during this time Buddhism was patronized by Ashoka, who ruled large parts of India, and Buddhism was also the mainstream religion until the Gupta Empire period. Sanskritization. Since Vedic times, people from many strata of society throughout the subcontinent tended to adapt the religious and social life to Brahmanic norms, a process sometimes called Sanskritization. It is reflected in the tendency to identify local deities with the gods of the Sanskrit texts.